Hey everyone, it's Chris here again, and I want to talk today about Vagrant provisioning. Now, in the last video, we had created a Vagrant VM. It had MySQL and Flyway pre-installed in it, and I asked the question at the end of the video, how did I get that MySQL Flyway box created so that we could actually run that tutorial? Now, if you haven't seen that video, you can go ahead and have a look at it, or if you're just interested in Vagrant provisioning, you can pick up right here. But this is the box that we used in the previous video. It's one of my boxes, and it has MySQL and Flyway pre-installed. So how did I do that? Well, to cut to the chase, we can go to my GitHub. My GitHub is Chris B. Matthews. And on that GitHub account, I have a project called MySQL Flyway Vagrant, which I forked from another guy, and he had done the work to install MySQL, and I did the extra stuff to install Flyway. So let's start by pulling this project down. I'm going to copy the URL for this repo, and I'll go to my terminal and I will do a git clone on this. Okay, so I'm going to go into the directory now and have a look at these files. The Vagrant file you're familiar with from the last video. There's a few other files in here. It's the install.sh that's the new interesting one. But let's go look at all these files in Visual Studio Code. Right, so the Vagrant file is here. It's pretty simple, pretty small, but you'd recognize some settings from the last video, I believe. So the config VM box is the basis for this box. It's Ubuntu Xenial 64. So that's the base OS that we're going to be using to create this box. You'd recognize the port forwarding from the previous video, but the thing I want to focus on is the config VM provision. And that is what's the most interesting thing for this video. Now, Vagrant has different provisioners, what it calls provisioners. And those provisioners can do different things. This VM is using the shell provisioner. In other words, I want you to use the shell to run a shell script. Okay, and that's what this is doing. So you can probably imagine that this script is installing MySQL and installing Flyway. And you'd be correct about that. Go have a quick look at it. And you can see that it is doing the apt-get commands to go and get MySQL installed. I put this little thing in here to turn password authentication on via SSH for our friends on Windows who may need to use PuTTY to get into the box, and the Flyway installation. But before I get into that, let's simplify this a little bit. I'm going to turn off the port forwarding for now, and I'm going to turn off this provisioner for the moment, just so I can show you a very basic provision. So the most basic shell provisioning you can do is an inline provision. So if I say config.vm.provision, and I say I'm using the shell provisioner, I can say just execute some inline code, and we will execute hello world. Okay, so pretty simple. Question is, when does this provisioner run? Well, if I pop over to the terminal again, and I'll bring up VirtualBox as well. I'll do a Vagrant up on this box. So the box is almost up. We're almost all the way there. So notice at the very end, it said running provisioner shell, and it ran our inline script, and it did the echo. Okay, so on the initial Vagrant up, your provisioner runs. All right, but if I do a Vagrant reload, which does a halt and an up again, the provisioner will not automatically rerun. Okay, so the machine came back up, but it says the machine was already provisioned. So I would need to use Vagrant provision or -- provision to force it to run again. If I do a Vagrant provision, it forces the provisioner to run again for this box, and we get the hello world again. If I want to do it on a reload, because perhaps I've changed something, Vagrant reload, I can say -- provision, and this will force the provisioner to run again after the reboot. So those are the three situations in which provisioning actually run. On the initial Vagrant up, or anytime I issue Vagrant Provision, or if I issue Vagrant Reload -- Provision. That's the default behavior for Vagrant. So there you see that the provisioner ran again because we forced it to. Now there is a way that you can set it up so the provisioner will always run no matter what. If we just pop back over to Visual Studio Code, for this inline provision, we can also say run always. That will force it to always run. So let's go try that out. If I say Vagrant Reload, the provisioner should just run automatically without the -- provision. Okay, so it ran the provisioner automatically. It even says provisioners marked to run always will still run. If you actually don't want that to happen, you could say Vagrant Reload -- no provision. And it would do a reload without executing the provisioners. But in this case, we don't want to do that. Now, if we return back to the Vagrant file, we can have more than one of these. So and I'm going to have this one not run always. So in this case, I don't know what that message means, but in this case, my initial provision ran and my second one ran. Of course, anytime I run Vagrant Provision, the two will run again because it's going to execute all provisioners. It will not execute both of them if I just do a simple Vagrant Reload. It will only execute the one that I'm forcing to run every time. Okay, so you see that in this case it ran the provisioner and only ran our first script because that's the only one that's set to run always. So that's kind of interesting. Now, there are other kinds of provisioners that Vagrant provides. So another simple one that Vagrant provides is the file provisioner. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a brand new file. And let's say I wanted this file to get onto my machine. Now we know that the machine mounts the Vagrant project by default into /vagrant on the VM. But what if I wanted to bake this file directly into the machine somewhere? Well, that's what the file provisioner is for. It actually copies the file into the machine and then it's permanently in the machine. I don't need to be running the machine from a particular project. This file will always be in there. So I'm going to add a new provisioner. So this one is a file provisioner. I'm going to say source. Source starts with S. And I'm going to take that my new file.txt. And it's going to go to a particular destination. And we can actually send it anywhere. I'm going to send it to the home directory. And I'm going to call it my new file.txt in the home directory. So that'll copy the file over. Let's have a look at that. So it's running the file provisioner, and it would have copied the file in. We can be sure of that by saying vagrant SSH and going and looking at what's in the VM. So I'm in the home directory, and notice my new file.txt is there. I can even, there it is. So that's kind of interesting because that's how you could bake in files into your VM. Now there's some weird nuances with the file provisioner. You can copy entire directories. So rather than a file, I could have, I'll show you. So I can also copy directories in. So I can just say now it's a little bit picky about trailing slashes. So by default, if you add no trailing slashes, it's going to copy this thing directly to a new directory on the target VM. It's going to copy another new file into this directory. If I were to put a trailing slash here, it would copy the entire directory underneath it again. So we'd have mynewdir / mynewdir with the other new file in it. But I'm going to leave it like this. We're going to do a vagrant provision. We ran the two file provisioners, and I will go in and look. So my new directory is there, and another new file is there. So that's how that works, the file provisioner. Now, Vagrant actually provides a lot of different provisioners beyond just shell and file. It also provides Chef, Puppet. It even provides a Docker provisioner, so that's kind of interesting. You can run Docker from within a Vagrant VM. Those are all subjects for future videos, but for this video, we return back over to the shell provisioner. So if I re-enable this, and this is forcing it to go to an install.sh. Think about this. Since I can run Vagrant Provision at will, it probably makes sense that this file should be rerunnable. In other words, it would be best if every time I run this, it produces essentially the same results. And I believe that that's the case for this file. Since we're asking it to do an install for MySQL Server, we know that apt will not reinstall something unless it's actually needed to be reinstalled. So this actually is a rerunnable script, even though it's maybe overkill because each time it's doing some changes to configuration files, each time it's setting password authentication to yes, the file is rerunnable. And the advantage of that is I could continue to modify this provision script and just run Vagrant Provision, Vagrant Provision, Vagrant Provision until I get it perfect. Now, of course, we can always do Vagrant Destroy and throw away the VM and do Vagrant Up and start it over again. But as long as your file is rerunnable, you actually can experiment a little bit with this. So this now, we've got a lot of provisioners running. The big one is the installer. So if we run Vagrant Provision, so here you can see it's actually doing the apt update. So you can see now it's installing the MySQL server. So we notice my provision is done. That's the new command that I added to that install script. And now it's complete. So if I go to Vagrant SSH and we have a look in here, notice Flyway is now in here. Flyway, just like last time, I can also run MySQL and log in as root, and I'm in. So I provisioned this machine and now it has MySQL and Flyway on it as well. So that's pretty interesting. Now, if you want to distribute this, what would you do? So there's a command for that. It's called Vagrant Package. And what this will do is it will create a package.box file in this directory, in your project directory. And the package.box file is essentially your VM compressed and exported for distribution. Okay, so while that's exporting, if we go back over to the cloud, when I created this box, when I uploaded this box to the cloud, all I did was I did a Vagrant package. I got my package.box and I created an account and I was able to upload that package.box as MySQL Flyway. Now the way it works is your account, my account name is CB Matthews, so whatever your box is called, it's prefixed with your account name. I could add as many of these boxes as I choose, and then they're available to me or anybody else on the Vagrant Cloud, which is actually very handy. If you're working in a team and you create some sort of developer machine box or a set of base developer tools, you could distribute it on the Vagrant Cloud and ask everyone on your team to do a Vagrant init with the box name, and they should get everything. But of course, it's smart to maintain the Vagrant file and the rest of the configuration as a project that you commit to Git or somewhere like that, so you can always recreate the box at will. Okay, so with that done, if we take a look, I have a new very large file in here called package.box, and that's what I can use to distribute this Vagrant VM. We know it's pre-provisioned. Of course, I can always continue to evolve the Vagrant file, and I could run a Vagrant package again and get new versions, which I could upload up to Vagrant Cloud. So that's Vagrant provisioning, at least at a very basic level. I hope that was helpful. In the next video, I do want to talk about immutable infrastructure, because that's where all of this starts to shine. So thanks for your attention, and I'll see you next time.